Test, test. I think we should be live. As always, let me just make sure we are streaming. And if you're already here in any of the chats, say hello. I had an issue again today with LinkedIn. So unfortunately, I did leave a comment in the old event, but I wasn't able to connect to it to actually create the stream. So I had to create a new one. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, let me know if you've made it to this stream. And we'll get started here shortly. But again, I'm going to wait a couple minutes. I think we're already a minute early for people to roll in since it's a live event. I know sometimes people watching the recording are always like skip ahead a certain amount, but this is a live event format. So we're going to wait for some people to join. And again, if you're here, let me know in the chat that you can hear and see me. And if you want to join the stream, you'll be able to do that as well. But a lot of people end up talking in the chat, which is totally fine. Actually, I'm going to show the chat on screen as well. Okay, cool. I see people saying LinkedIn is working well. Thank you, John. Hello, David. Welcome back. How's everyone doing today? And again, I'm going to wait a minute before we go into the slides, which is really just covering, well, we'll do a little intro about kind of the format of the event as normal. And a call to action for everyone is to let us know what book you all want to read next. So if you do have a book in mind in the Slack channel, which I'll point to later as well, there is already a little bit of a discussion about that, but I'd love to know what books you want to read next. I know there is quite a bit I have on a list. I need to see this month which ones are coming out soon because I usually don't actually select them until they're published, or I know for sure they're being published by that date because sometimes they get pushed out. So this event is for discussing the Context Engineering for Multi-Agent Systems book, but we also sometimes go off the rails into our own tangents, usually about like your personal experience, which I think is really the fun part because anyone can read the book. But if you want to just discuss around the topics that we end up talking about, I think that's really valuable. So feel free to put your personal experience in. I know a lot of people might not have even read the book, or maybe they just started the book, or they want to see if they want to grab the book. So totally okay to just put in your own experience and talk about the subjects that we'll be talking about. And if you want to check out this book, I'm going to share these in the chat. This is the link to the O'Reilly page. Let me pull up the LinkedIn stream so I can share in the chat there as well. All right, so this is the link to the O'Reilly page. It's a Pact Publishing book, so you should be able to find this on their site as well. It might even directly link to it, I forget, on O'Reilly. I tend to read on the O'Reilly platform because I have a subscription. Also, noting for people, if you have a library subscription or you're at university, a lot of times you can get access to O'Reilly through your library as well. So I would recommend checking that out if you're interested. I'm going to share the link to the GitHub as well. Most of the books have an accompanying GitHub, so if you just want to read the code, you can check it out there. But I always recommend, going and purchasing the book if you like the contents for sure, and supporting the authors. And then also, people like to ask for the links to the slides sometimes. So I'm just going to throw that in here as well. This should allow you to view the slides. And if you want to come back and pull any of the links that are in here, it might make it easier for you to do so. I should probably add these to the description of the video later as well. And if you're new here, in short, we've been reading a new book every month for, I think, over almost 2.5 years now. It was kind of on and off before that, but we've been going straight for over 2 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. There is a Slack channel, like I'd mentioned earlier. So if you do want to discuss the book kind of during the month, you can do so here because we're just meeting once a month right now. We used to meet weekly if you're one of the OG people, but that was a lot to do to try to cram in. So we've been doing a monthly event, but we do have the Slack channel if you kind of want to discuss asynchronously or during the month, which I would totally encourage. Check that out. And then to recap where we are in 2026, we read hands-on machine learning with scikit-learn and PyTorch in January, and then AI system performance engineering in February. And then this month's book is context engineering for multi-agent systems. And then next month's book is designing data-intensive applications, second edition. People have raved about this book, the first edition, and the second edition just came out, so it should be very updated. I'm excited to check it out because people have been talking about the first one for quite some time. I wanted to read it, but it came out a while ago, so I knew it was going to be outdated. And I saw they're working on the second one, so I was holding out until that. So I think it'll be really exciting. And then again, what books do you all want to read next? Let me know either in the chat right now, join the Slack channel, put the titles in later, and we can go kind of create a list of what the rest of the year is going to look like. These are the books we read last year, and we again read a whole 12 books the year before. If you want to check any of those out, you can also check out the GitHub, which contains the list there. I might need to update that actually with the latest book. And then before we dive into the contents of the book, again, I guess on the format, I think I kind of already described it, but say hello, talk in the chat live. A lot of people do like to just keep the discussion in the chat, and I kind of pull out interesting topics into the conversation up here. But if you do want to join the stream, you can message me on LinkedIn, and I can give you a link to join. And then I'll actually share that link here in a minute too on LinkedIn. So if you do want to join in and come up here, you don't have to turn on your camera. If you just want to do audio, that's fine as well. And then actually discuss things. So maybe you see when we get to a topic and you actually want to come and speak on it, or you have experience with it, you can do that as well. So just let me know if you want to join in. And then one last thing before we go to the chapters of the books is shout outs. Does anyone have anything they want to shout out in the chat? And I can highlight it in here. Is anybody hiring? Is anyone looking for a job? I've actually seen quite a few people, I think, from these streams get connected and at least get interviews. I think some actually got jobs. So if you're hiring, like sometimes it's around the topic of the book specifically, like in finance or something like that. And people are like, hey, I just graduated. I'm looking for a job. People working in that field and at least brought them in for an interview. So I encourage everyone to shout out in the chat if you're hiring, looking for a job, or if you just want to share any other interesting, awesome projects or events coming up that you're excited about. Do so now before we pop into the chapters of the books. Obviously, you can share it later as well, but just wanted to pause and give an opportunity for people to share anything up. I have a couple things while people are hopefully formulating thoughts and typing those out. A couple things I'll share out is I've started a new kind of stream format here, which I think is really exciting. And I think people really enjoyed the first one we did last week, which was doing a stream on Fridays. It's kind of semi-casual, but we actually go through code and build something. So last week we talked about building MCP servers, and you're kind of encouraged through the week to spend at least like an hour or so trying to learn whatever the topic is or the tool is for that week, and then build something with it. And so last week was MCP with Fast MCP. This week is doing agentic search with Tvili, which is a really cool API for adding search and context to your agents or LLMs. And then next week is going to be reinforcement learning with OpenEnv. So I think it's really exciting. Check that out. And then one other thing is if you're in the Seattle area, we are hosting an event with Weights and Biases tomorrow. If you want to check that out, I'll be there. It's always fun meeting people in person. And also, we are hiring at Union. So you can go to Union AI. Oops, another way. Started typing in again over here. You can go to Union AI/careers. And we have several open job openings right now. I'll post the links in the chat as well. Sorry, I lost the chat here. And then we're building really cool products around AI orchestration, basically an end-to-end platform where people use to build production machine learning systems, whether that's training models, hosting models, or now a lot of stuff around agents. So if you want to check that out, go to Union AI. We have a really popular open source called Flyte as well, Flyte. Totally recommend looking at this if you're looking for open source solutions. But you can check it out and kind of see if that's something you're interested in working on as well. And that's also, if you've noticed, if you're in the Slack, we're in the flight community Slack. So again, it's our open source kind of AI Slack there. All right, with that, let me see if there was any chats that I missed. David said, nice, excited for the search one. Yep, that's on Friday. Check it out. And trying to be a little bit more diligent about posting like a thread for that topic inside Slack and then sharing resources and projects there. It was really fun last week. Again, that was the first one. I think we're maybe still going to be iterating on the format a little bit or so. But I really, really liked it. And it's something I want to keep up with. And if people were at the AI Book Club a long time ago, we used to meet weekly. And it was really fun having like a weekly cadence of doing something. But like I didn't always, or it was hard to read the book. Like people didn't want to read the book every single week, and it was hard to get through chapters sometimes. So I think having something more specific with a interesting tool, and it's not booked too far out. So if something new comes out, we can add that as a topic. So that's the other thing. If you're in the Slack channel, let me know what other tools you want to do on that kind of Friday weekly stream. I think it's going to be really fun, and you get to showcase your projects, which is exciting. So you actually get a little bit more of a call to action to build something, not just consume content. I think that's going to be really cool. And you can learn a lot, I feel like, from just spending like an hour learning one of the tools. Like at least to the point where it kind of breaks the barrier down from you getting started with it. And then hopefully you can expand on what you built on that, by that Friday or whatever. If you're interested in that area, dive way deeper in it. And John said they're open for senior software engineering manager roles. Feel free to connect. So anyone connect with John, John Dellenbaugh. I might be mispronouncing your last name there, but connect with their profile if you're looking for senior software engineering manager roles. And John, I think if you look at the union site, I forget for sure. I had it up, but I think there might be a senior, or there's a software engineering manager role, I think, in there. You should take a look at it and see if it's a good fit for you. All right, so the chapters of this book, and I'll read the chapter titles here, and then I kind of break down the chapters later and kind of usually go deeper into my experiences around those topics. Especially with this one, actually, I felt like, and maybe other people feel the same, if you've built a multi-agent system, you've probably done a lot of what this book covers before. So not saying it's a bad book by any means. If you haven't done like multi-agent things, it's probably really good. But I felt like a lot of this I kind of covered, but it's never a bad idea to have a refresher or rephrasing of the way that you're doing things. So I'm going to actually pull a lot from my experiences probably in the chapter breakdowns as well. And like I mentioned, as I'm reading these chapter links, I'm going to share a guest link on the LinkedIn stream. So if you do want to potentially join in and discuss any of these topics further, like if you've been building any of these, you could do so. All right, so the first chapter is From Prompts to Context, Building the Semantic Blueprint. And again, I'll dive deeper into these. I'm just going to read them off first, and then we'll go into the deeper into the chapters. Chapter 2 was Building a Multi-Agent System with MCP. And then chapter 3 was Building the Context-Aware Multi-Agent System. And then we had assembling the context engine. And then we had hardening the context engine, which hardening in this case, I think is usually just making a little bit more production grade and adding things like error handling, etc. Chapter 6 is building the summarizer agent for context reduction. So if this is kind of the what I thought a lot of the book would be about, but it makes sense. They just kind of build a multi-agent system here. And if you've been building like multi-agent systems, you've probably come into this part where you have to build some sort of summarizer or something that gives you that context that you need, but isn't the entire chat. Chapter 7's high fidelity RAG and defense. So they start adding RAG in, and then also, I think it's in this chapter, I have some notes on it that we'll cover later, but I think this might be start adding some things in like a sanitizer layer for the input. So if you're looking at malicious inputs or prompts from people. And then we had chapter 8, architecting for reality, and it goes more into the moderation, reducing latency, and then policy-driven AI. Chapter 9 was architecting for brand agility. It's kind of taking the system that you had already built and then reconfiguring it more easily now, not doing a lot of code configuration, but just context configuration to make it do a new task. So it went from you do this like NASA one, and then you build a kind of legal assistant, and then you build a strategic marketing kind of agent or LM type of thing. And then they have the blueprint for production ready AI. So they go a little bit more into not super detailed, but things like containers and how you might think about actually scaling up AI systems in the future. Like, so they mentioned Kubernetes and stuff like that. And then there's this chapter 11, which actually didn't really have any content. That was just like a call to action to go get a PDF if you had bought the book. So I'm going to delete that here. Before I go into the other chapters a little bit deeper, any comments so far? Did anyone read the book? Do any of these chapters sound the most interesting to you? Have you run into anything that it sounds like it's covered here? Like, I guess really, has anyone built a multi-agent system before? Is a good question. And then have you probably encountered, depending on what your agent's doing actually, but you may have encountered like, how do you build context or manage context between those multiple agents? I think that might be a good question. And then as a follow-up, yes, you did. How did you manage that? So as people are thinking about the responses there, I know sometimes there's a lag between when I talk to also potentially watching on the stream. So I'll go to the kind of first chapter breakdown and some thoughts on it. So the from prompts to context, this covers understanding context engineering, SRL, which is semantic role labeling. So you're basically extracting parts out from the context and then giving a label. So you could say like, what did this thing? When did they do it? It depends on what you want that to look like for your agent system. So I can talk a little bit about what I've done in the past. But you're adding like a structure to your context. So instead of just having like a blob of text, you can say, this agent or this person asked this question. This was the response to it. Maybe even like these are the tools that I called. If you want to add tracing in, which they talk about later, which I've done in the past as well. Like you might want to add in basically, usually what I've done with some of the agents I've built is having a structured JSON that contains a summary text of the thing that I need. So if I'm doing something like a research agent and I don't want the entire web page saved, but I want to have like, if I'm asking like, what was the GDP of this country or something like that, it just saves the part that it thinks is actually the knowledge that it needs. And then it could say maybe what was the query that got to that point, maybe the tools called for that in the order of which they were called. So when you ask your agent or a chatbot a thing where you say, multiply that last GDP by whatever you're doing, it can actually go reference and see the sequence of them too. So it knows when you say like that, which one would be the last one. So how do you structure that in a I guess semantic role labeling type of context is kind of what they're getting at. They don't go that deep into the early part here. I'm just adding stuff that I've learned and done in the past for my use cases. And then they get to some of that stuff a little bit later as well. And David said they really liked the explanation in chapter 1. I had a general sense of the info, but author made it gel in an easy parse manner. Awesome. Right now, are you talking about doing like the semantic role labeling type of thing? Because I think that was what most of the chapter 1 was about from my notes here. And then chapter 2 was building a multi-agent system with MCP. So the first one, you start building out kind of just a local. I actually forget because it's been a while since I read the first chapter here. But the first chapter, I think you just build out everything kind of locally with embedded tools, which again, I've done it this way a lot. And sometimes that's a really good way. Building with MCP allows you to build out tools that you could call from different agents without having to redefine those tools again for that specific agent. And again, we did the MCP stream last week. Let me actually pull that up. Not the stream itself, but the repo for it. So if people are interested in getting started with MCP the first time, you could check out the code here for last Friday's stream. And I think that broke it down. You can also watch the recording, which I need to go link in the GitHub repo. I didn't do that yet. But I think what people were saying on last Friday and how I felt is like building MCP might sound daunting, but if you look at the official MCP client or with fast MCP, which is what we used on Friday, or what I used on Friday, it's really, really easy to build your own server. So you basically, if you've ever, again, built a multi-agent system before, you're probably defining tools in some way, whether that's inside a framework with like a predefined at tool decorator, or you're doing it manually as a function. You really just do the same thing at MCP, but then you say you host that somewhere, and then you allow an agent to go in, learn context, and see what tools are there, and then understand how to use those tools. So it just makes it really easy to send to different agents. And then later on, like I'd mentioned, they build like you go from the NASA kind of toy one to a legal assistant to a marketing one, and they use MCP so it can go discover those different tools for those contexts. And David said he had built multi-agent systems, but didn't think to use MCP to orchestrate between them. We'll definitely try. And you don't have to either. It depends on there's different use cases for it, right? Like if you're not sharing tools between agents, you might not want an MCP server. MCP is also just fantastic if you have something like a tool and you want agents to easily, quickly understand about it. So it's very common for tools to build an MCP that you can connect Claude Code to, for instance, and then it has a easier time understanding context about how to use that tool without having to do searches. You can add in like kind of typical gotchas and stuff like that in there, which is awesome. So there's really good use cases for MCP, and then you don't always need an MCP because you're going to have some latency and it's going to have to do some querying. Maybe you don't want to do that. You just want to have built-in tools for your multi-agent system, which is what MAS stands for as well. If you see that in some of the chapters here, which isn't a common acronym I've seen, but he uses it in this book. And so this chapter, I don't think I read this off, covers architecting the multi-agent system workflow MCP, building a multi-agent system with MCP. So a lot of the chapters start with architecting and thinking about how this looks like. So they have like diagrams. Again, recommend getting the book. They do a good job of going into like what that architecture would look like, and then they kind of build it. I don't think the code examples might not show the architecture piece. I'm going to add in a little bit of error handling and validation, the evolution of AI architecture. So I think this talks about MCP kind of coming in and then building tools or tools for building agent systems. And then chapter 3 is building the context-aware multi-agent system. This is where they call it dual RAG, multi-agent system. But this is like, if you're using ChatGPT or any of these other chatbot interfaces, you know that it usually starts storing some context about you. And this kind of chapter goes into that. It introduces RAG to pull knowledge from, which you might be familiar with. RAG is a retrieval augmented generation. Often it's coming from like a vector database, and then it does a query, pulls the information in, and then generates a response based on the information that it has. And then in this case, they have a second RAG database that, as you're communicating with your agent, can start storing stuff into that RAG. So it becomes kind of another, like a longer form context engine. And so this is, you see this a lot again with like a chatbot agent, or sorry, a chatbot is a good example of where you start seeing stuff like this, that you've probably used this. But there's a lot of different areas where you could use this. But if just storing long-term context, again, often you store it in a vector database, or it could be a .md file, a .txt file, whatever, depending on what you're doing. But kind of the typical thing in production is putting it in some sort of vector database. And they use Pinecone in this book, but you could look at using like Weaviate or Chroma or a whole bunch of different ones. And then chapter 4 was assembling the context engine. This was architecting the context engine, assembling the system, running the engine. So this is where they go a little bit deeper into actually, like they use engine here, I think as a term, but really they're building a planner executor agent, which is where you have a planner phase, like a planner agent. Usually they're two different things. Comes up with like, has access to tools, or I've done a lot with multiple agents, has access to those things, and then it can come up with what the plan is. Like, I'm going to first do this search, and then I'm going to calculate this thing based on the search results, and then I'm going to do this thing. And if you do it right, I don't think they really go into this in the book, but if you want to get into like production grade type of stuff, you can think about or have your planner execute things in parallel. So like, can it do multiple searches at once, pull all that in, and then do the next phase? That's something you want to think about with the planner executor type of agents. and they build on top of MCP. And then they also talk about adding traces in here. So what tools or other agents are being called. And usually, I mean, I guess it depends on how you're doing it. I've always just added traces in, like for your planner is going to say what to do. But if you are calling multiple agents, the other agent will decide what tools to call. So then outside of that agent, when you return something, you might want to have a log or a trace of what tools it used to do, or have that all tracked somewhere. I mean, and talking about all this stuff, like that's stuff that Union and Flight actually makes really easy. So it's kind of fun seeing here's all these problems in the industry, and then seeing how like why people actually do use our tool. I actually wrote a blog on multi-agent systems. You can run it locally as well. Let me pull that up real quick because it actually covers a lot of kind of what's in here. I'll share this in the chat. So this goes into like what I talked about, building parallel systems. Share those in the chat if anyone wants to check them out. And I have a little GIF of, actually, this might be relevant for this. Let me bring it over real quick. We'll go back to the book here, but just showing what the planner agent kind of does. It comes with a plan. Then, like I was saying, it could have multiple parallel steps, and then runs in a wave, and then it runs in another wave. One of the things, like the pros and cons of the just using a planner agent, which is all this book really does. There's different types of agents that you can use, and by types I mean like, so planner agent is a common one. You might have heard of React, which is reaction or sorry, reflection and action. So the planner one is kind of brittle if it's just by itself because it comes with this plan and then executes all those steps, but it doesn't know how to react if the data looks different in one of those steps. It's just doing these kind of sequentially, which is great for a lot of use cases. But you might want to use a reflection agent or a React agent if you want to see what the data looks like and then decide to do something else, or maybe you want to do that step again. Like I need to search again because this didn't get the results I want. And the cool thing about that is you can combine both of these. So if you do want efficiency, you can do like a step like this, where you do stuff in parallel, you do another step, and then you could reflect on that. And then the React part of the agent could kind of think, do I need to rerun any of these things again? Which is cool. So you can keep adding these different types of agents. And then there's other ones like manager agent and different sub agents, and it's a whole bunch of different ways of kind of how you orchestrate these things. And here I think it kind of just covers the little bit of the planner executor side, and again, not quite as I don't think they go into the kind of parallelism part, which I think that's one of the best things about planner agents. Chapter 5 is just hardening the context engine. This just goes through a more robust kind of architecture walkthrough, and then you're refactoring for scalability in the real world, and then they modularize the engine. So I think up until this point, everything was in like a Jupyter notebook. And then they kind of get out of just the notebook and put things into structured Python files, and then add things like logging, better error handling, dependency injection, which I think in this case, they just kind of have a script that does like pip installs. But later in the other chapter, and what I would recommend is also looking at using like Docker images if you actually want true reproducibility between your agents. If you're like spinning up containers, for example, you might want to use something like that. And then chapter 6 is building the summarizer agent for context production. They use the term glass box. I haven't heard that too much personally. I'm not sure if that's a common term, but basically the opposite of a black box, which is where you don't know what's going on. Really, just they're saying build a more transparent system. And I think that's where it comes back to, like providing the traces for your agents and logging those appropriately. I guess if you're just playing around with agents, not putting in production, you might start out without proper tracing. But it gets really hard to debug. If you have a multi-agent system and you don't have good logging, or you use something that can return the traces or even show workflows in real time, it's really hard to debug is what I found. So definitely recommend checking out something that can give you traces. And I think the blog I did talks about that. The Flight SDK, even without any cluster or anything like that, you can do that as well. And then talks about building the summarizer agent. And we already talked a little bit about like what this could be. I think it really just depends on what you're doing. Like I talked about building that JSON, including maybe the traces and the sequence of things and all the tool calls, or at least the agent calls in there. This really just depends on what you are doing, how you want to structure this, in my opinion. So if anyone has structured like a summarizer agent and wants to talk about it in the chat or during the stream, definitely do so. And then one thing is you're often shrinking these down so you're not spending as much on context, and that could be like spending time, your context window, or that those tokens actually cost money sometimes when you add it up. So if you're doing this like over and over thousands of times or something like that, even though API calls are kind of cheap right now, that can still add up a lot over time. So they talk about, how do you reduce token count, and how can you actually maybe calculate like saving money with the token count reduction. And then, as always, good prompting plays a huge role here. Don't just say summarize this, say how you want it summarized. Again, I might even have it in a specific format with something like a JSON. And then chapter 7 is the high fidelity RAG and defense. So this one, they go through architecting a trustworthy research assistant, implementing the high fidelity RAG and agent defenses, validation, and backwards compatibility. Basically, like you're basically redesigning part of the context engine here. So they're talking about making it backwards compatible with the earlier part of the engine, as they call it. And again, they talk about RAG also traces on RAG. So like adding citations, like when you pull in a RAG chunk, this is really important. What I found most of the time, well, I don't know if most of the time, a lot of time from stuff that I've worked in, I want to know where that source came from. So one, I could debug it, but also this can be really important for some of the fields as well, right? Like if you are doing something in medical research or legal, you probably want to see what resources it pulled from to come up with that decision or that response. So it actually pulls in like a chunk, but it knows what doc that came from, and then it can point to it. So really important if you're doing something in work where you want to go validate, actually go maybe read that whole paper, read that part that was cited. So you could pull up like a PDF, maybe even the specific part in that PDF, and then you can go double check and see, yes, this actually is relevant to my case or my research. So usually super important if you're doing RAG stuff, or again, maybe not usually, depends on the application, but if you're doing something critical where you think you might want to double check it, having something do citations really good. And then they talk a little bit about sanitizing the input, like if someone's doing a malicious prompt. They kind of have a super, super basic implementation of this where they just have a list or a JSON schema of like some common ones, and then they check to see if that like exists in there. I think there's better ways to do it, and I haven't done this recently, but one thing I used to do, and I worked at a company where we were building like tools around this, is you could even have like a list kind of like they had here, but instead of just saying is this in there, one thing that can get better results sometimes is one, keep adding to that list, and then also you could do some sort of embedding search between that list. So even if it doesn't really exactly match that, you could see how similar is it to this, right? And so that had better results at least a while ago. I'm not sure if that's still like the cutting edge part. So if anyone has done other types of malicious checking, and I know there's a bunch of different tools out for it now as well, let me know in the chat. And then chapter 8 was architecting for reality. So they go into they basically taking it from the more kind of toy example, which was like using this NASA data set that I often see used in RAG apps. I know I've used it before, even I think in a demo. It's one that people often point to. It's easy to use. It's cool to see. But this kind of updates the RAG app, updates the sanitizer, because before it was looking at, I think, the input and the RAG info or something like that. So I think they separate them here in this chapter. Yeah. So it moderates input and LM output as well, which I always recommend doing, at least monitoring in some way. It's actually something I've been working on again recently. And again, like I mentioned, that's kind of used to be what I worked in, but at a bare minimum too, when you're putting something in production, this doesn't really monitor. They actually just moderate. They have that quick little sanitizer check for output. So if your LM says something malicious as well, or has profanity, or doesn't reflect the demeanor that you want to be able to stop that. And that's kind of what they have, this kind of simple moderate thing to do. But I always recommend for people, if you haven't done this before, you should, if you're actually putting stuff in production, is have some sort of even starting out with just like a lightweight monitoring, which could be looking at inputs and outputs for any type of ML model, really, but we're talking about LLMs here. And then you could maybe extract metrics from those. So if you're doing like a lot of chatter, you probably can't read every single message, but you could look at things like having a lightweight sentiment score, and you could see, what does a sentiment look like coming into the model? What does a sentiment look like coming out of the model? You could have things that just use regex even and make sure that there's no phone numbers or credit card numbers being returned out of your model, things like that. You should set up some sort of monitoring thing, so when those things do happen, or you can get an alert about it. Same with any ML model, not just LMs. Like, you should be able to look at data coming in, and if it drifts a lot, it's called data drift, where the data no longer really reflects the data it was trained on. Then you can trigger an alert, because you might want to go double check, because chances are your model's not performing as well anymore, because the data now no longer really reflects exactly what it was trained on. So definitely check it out more monitoring. They don't really go into it in the book. That's just me pulling from my experiences here. And then chapter 9 goes into architecting for brand agility. So like I think I'd mentioned, we were just covering the other chapters. This one just kind of shows that at this point you'd built the system, and then you can easily swap out like to a different RAG database or context file. And then the system should now work for like this kind of new use case. And then chapter 10, they talk about productionizing the engine here, or the system. So again, they talk about a little bit like, I don't think they went super deep into the use cases here, but they talk about like what you would want to think about productionizing more enterprise type of guardrails. It's good to think about. And then also talking about containers, like Docker files, instead of just using pip install for things. You want to make sure your entire container is reproducible. So if you are like spinning down and spinning up compute for these agents, they're going to be reproducible. And then also scaling. So they mentioned Kubernetes here as well, where that's where it manages like clusters of compute. You can orchestrate what spins up, what spins down. And that's what Flight is actually built on. So it's like, it makes that really easy to wrap around it. But they kind of talk about these things that you might want to think about when you get to that more production phase. And that's the end of the book, which, by the way, felt like a super light read. If you were reading the books the other months, these two were both super long, like over 1,000 pages each, I think, or close to it. I know this one was over. I think this one was very close to it. This one took me a long time to read. This one, after those 2 months, felt almost like a light read. It was easy to go through. I think also because I was pretty familiar with a lot of the topics as well. But yeah, it sounds like, David, you read it. If you're still in the stream, what did you think about the book overall? And I was covering all the chapters. So if anyone has any other questions or things they want to dive deeper in, or pull from their experiences about any of the topics we talked about, let me know. I'll pause here for questions. We actually finished somewhat earlier than the other books. Like I was saying, it was kind of a shorter one. I finished my plan walkthrough. I mean, so if people don't have anything else they want to talk about, we might wrap the stream up early. But I'm going to leave it on and hang out and see what people want to talk about. And while that's going, let me actually go ahead and share the book link again too. Let me get the official packed link, I think. Yeah. So if people want to check out the book, I'll share the official packed link, not just the O'Reilly one, if it sounds interesting to you. I know quite a few people actually come to the stream and they go, oh yeah, that seems cool, I'm going to go check it out, and then go look at the book after. And they've said they got to chapter 5, but thought it was really good. Awesome. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Like I was saying, it was a fun kind of, it's not a light read, but it felt like it after the other books. It was a fun read for me. Sorry, I might have, I just hit my microphone. I don't know if that was loud for anyone. I think it's still on. Apologize. When David had mentioned, have I seen the Claude Code CLI repo was leaked. I saw some news around it. I did not dive into it yet. Sounds like you're interested in digging in to see if you can learn anything. I know I've seen some posts about it. I probably have to go check out and see. Yeah, what was it, last night or this morning? So I feel like some people will probably distill the interesting stuff, and then I'll hear about it that way, I hope, instead of me having to do a lot of digging. But I'm guessing, I don't know, I've seen discussion around this, but I think a lot of it's also on which I mean, I already assumed this. It's not just the model, it's the way they architect, like the, I don't know if you want to call it a harness or whatever we're calling it now. But the way you handle like planning and then making the checklist and how the model looks at those things, I think that'll be interesting to learn more about. Yep. And someone else just said they want to talk about the big news of the day: Claude Code escaping into the wild. If you have info on it, the most interesting things, put it in the chat. I don't have the info on it yet, but I did see that it happened. And I don't know how much, like, was it the full thing leaked out? What was it exactly that was leaked? Was it like the source code? Is it something else? Because I think, wasn't there like some other leak the other day, or maybe they're actually from the same thing, where someone found some unsecured files, and it also talked about like the next level of model potentially. I'm not sure if that came from the same thing. And John said they haven't read the book, but they are trying to grasp how agents and or MCP systems get the context. In my early experience, we provided context via .md files and adjusted the context when needed. In a full production system, I'd like to know how many different agents which interact with different tools get the right context. Yeah, so this is like the interesting thing is, when plenty of people are doing .md files now. So I don't know, that might be the new way instead of using a vector database. If you're using something like Claude Code locally, it seems like a lot of people are doing .md files. But if you have a agent in production, you might not be writing to just like a .md file or markdown file. I don't know why I'm saying .md file, markdown file. There's different ways to do it. That might work for your use case. And I think for what we're seeing, a lot of kind of things like people playing around with like OpenClaw and Claude Code locally, that can be good. But if you're doing something in production, I think, well, for me, I'll use something like that actually does spin up different containers. It's like inside of Flight or Union, and you pass information between those containers and different agents. So I think this would be similar. Again, like, I'm trying to think how to word it, because if you're doing it locally, you could just store things as a local file, which you could store these as a local file too, instead of like embedding something to S3. But you want to save it in a, like for me, a lot of times I've just done like a JSON format, but you could do whatever format works really, and then just have your LLM parse it. But I think JSON's good because you could also have specific keys maybe to pragmatically look for, instead of just pasting in the whole blob potentially. And then with if you're doing a markdown file, like I was saying, I would add in, like for my JSON blob, sometimes like traces, summary of what happened, maybe just the name entity that I was looking for, if that makes sense. And then the sequence of when they happened, or the time, depending on what you're doing. I think sequence is often fine, but maybe you do want a whole actual timeline. So you could save those in really whatever format you want. When I'm passing stuff between agents, I've used a lot of like just JSON. David said they're using Markdown though. But they want to move to vector for semantic search. Yeah, and the nice thing for like a vector database too, like if you're doing stuff in production, you want to think about keeping things a little bit more lightweight. If you're just using like a big markdown file, you either have to come up with a way where you're pulling chunks from, or you're pasting in the entire markdown file, which maybe is fine if you're summarizing it. Oh yeah, so, and John said, for production resilient systems, all context in a vector database type, all context is updated and stored. Then agents will refer to the context DB. Makes sense. Oh yeah, sorry. So I was talking about just kind of directly passing stuff between agents. But yes, I think for larger contexts, it's pretty common to be stored in a vector database. Sorry, yeah, I was thinking more in the close term for some of the stuff I work with, where I just want to pull in some small stuff. And then also really depends, like, I mean, you could store stuff in a vector database. Context can also be coming from different tools. So if you're doing things like interfacing with linear or different tools where you have knowledge stored, then context would be coming from that storage. Like if you're interfacing with another tool that provides it, like let's say Notion or something like that as well. But yeah, I think pretty common if you're just storing long-term context, like by default, you usually use like a vector type of database. Weaviate is a pretty good one. They have a paid service. They have a free tier. I forget what it is. All of them, I mean, honestly, all of them work pretty similar in my experience that I've played around with. Weaviate is cool. I think they have a local client now too. So if you want to experiment locally with that, and then later on you want to go to remote, they make that really easy. Chroma, I think, is maybe the default go-to for like a local or lightweight vector database that maybe you're hosting. They use Pinecone in this book. I think they have a free tier as well. I knew Qdrant had, at least they used to have a really good free tier. Like as a developer, like I forget what the amount you got, but it was a decent size that you got to work with before you'd have to pay anything. So a whole bunch for you to check out. And again, the nice thing there is that you can do that semantic search, pull in just that relevant chunk. You're not pasting in the entire markdown file. I assume actually with David, with your markdown right now, does it kind of all get loaded in as context, or are you doing some sort of chunking on markdown and pulling in something specific? I assume not, just because that's probably why you want to move to the vector database. But yeah, context can really mean anything. It's pulling in anything from anywhere. So if you have other tools that you're interfacing with, or an MCP server or anything like that, it might not be working directly with a vector database, but you with that tool and then pulling in knowledge from that tool. So if you have like a ticketing system and then you want to pull in knowledge from a customer, right? You'd be pulling context in from that ticketing system, like all their previous tickets, or maybe anything about those tickets. So it depends what type of context you're working with. We're kind of towards the end here, but also call to action again. Keep the discussion going. But what book do you want to read next after designing data intensive applications? David said, no, they have chunking. Nice. They have checkpoints with detail and main brain files with a summary of all the checkpoints. Oh, that's awesome. So it sounds like you have a brain file that's a markdown, and then you have other markdown files, and that brain file has like points to those ones depending on the topic that they're using or that they have contained in there. That's cool. Yeah, who needs a vector database? Like I was saying, I've seen more and more people using just markdown file, because like if you're doing something like with Claude Code or OpenClaw, auto research, a lot of people are just storing things in markdown files now, which is fun to see. Like I haven't tried this kind of tree of markdown, but that makes sense that you could easily do it that way. I kind of like the idea, actually, having like a brain tree, because there's different ways with vector databases too. Like this is a thing in RAG, like where you had the nodes in like tree RAG, I forget what it was called, very similar, just in a markdown format, which might even be easier for you just to get started with. But with vector databases, you can do similar things as well. So instead of just querying everything semantically, you can actually say like, oh, I know that this type of knowledge is stored over in that database, etc. And I forget if it's called tree rag or something like that. Brain tree. I think Brain Tree is a company name, right? I don't think they do tree rag though. Awesome. Any other topics or things people want to throw out? Thank you, David and John. Really good discussion. Love hearing about what you're looking forward to doing, and then also what you've already done. That sounds really fun. Like I was saying, I haven't played around with the Markdown brain tree, but I like the idea a lot. And speaking on checkpointings, like like when I've done something, I guess with the containers, like in flight with agents, it'll return something, and then that knowledge is still there, like it's logged as an output in a tree, and so I can always traverse that tree and go back and get it too, which is kind of cool. So kind of like how you have your separate empties, except for these are just kind of automatically logged states as outputs from previous runs. Some said, is there, or John said, is there any particular design strategy that is more cost efficient, lower token cost? I mean, I think anything that just like I don't have one strategy that I know of. Maybe David knows or someone else in the chat. I think typically it's just getting smaller amount of tokens in your summary context. So I think one of the chapters in here, like when they're talking about designing the summary part, that's like a big thing. So again, depends on the context that your agent needs. Like, do you need a summary text blob, or do you just need like a named entity thing? That might actually work well enough, depending on what you're doing with your agent, and that would save a lot of context room. So if you don't need like a whole thing, like again, if you're scraping a web page to get something like I was using this recently, so it's an example that I was doing is like getting GDP from a web page about a country. You can scrape that whole web page, and then if you store that entire thing as context, that's really big, or much bigger than you need. And so this is an example that I actually ran into with scraping a web page. That whole thing was stored as context when I was just first making it because I wasn't designing around summarizing at first. And then I was like, oh yeah, this is this is stupid. Why am I saving the whole web page? The next agent steps don't care about that at all for the thing I was building. Again, sometimes they might. So you have to think about what your agents need. I mean, in my case, I could actually just extrapolate like country name, GDP. That's way shorter than any of the other stuff that was stored in there before. So I would just think about how to get to the least amount of tokens possible that's still valuable for your next step in your agent system. But it really depends on what your agent system is doing. I don't think there's one golden path to follow. Like you might need more of that page context if you're writing a blog about it and you wanted to pull in more context than just saying the GDP and the country name. Oh yeah, so whether the context comes from a database or markdown really has no impact on tokens. Yeah, it depends on I think, I mean, I guess if you're storing it storing in markdown or storing it in the database, you could think about how to store it more efficiently too. So when it pulls it in as context, it's just pulling in whatever you're returning. So if you're pulling in something from a vector database, you would just think about what you want to store as efficiently as possible. So again, maybe the country name and GDP is good enough for you, or do you need more information around it? But the context is whatever you're loading into the large language model. So there isn't really a huge effect on that, but there might be some sort of effect from like other things like latency or some other efficiency metrics or storage type of metrics. And I guess from the markdown perspective too, like how are you getting to that information? That would be something too. Like, does it have to traverse a whole bunch of markdown files or one giant markdown file to get to that information? So I think probably the vector database design by default, I'm guessing, can do a little bit better of a job, maybe surfacing that context more efficiently. You might be able to do this markdown files too, depending on how you have them stored. But I think that's one of the nice things about like the vector search is I can have an input as a user, and then it's going to go search that vector database from that and then just return that context. Whereas if you're doing a markdown file, even if you have the kind of markdown tree, I assume you're still going to have to pass in some of that markdown file as context as it traverses it. At least that's the way I'm thinking. David might have a different way that it semantically pulls in the context differently, but it says David said he blows through all session limits constantly. So I'm not sure. Not saying you don't have an efficient way to pull it in, but if that does that make sense, John? I think, and I'm just kind of thinking about it on the spot, so I'm sure there's probably better ways than what I just said too. But I think that probably a vector database just naturally has a easier way to get that context in without spending more context finding the information you're looking for, based on my guess of how the markdown files are architected. But once they're in, it doesn't really matter. It's just like getting to them might spend more tokens. Right, and we're almost at time again. This is really fun. I'm glad people seem to enjoy the topic a lot in the book. Hopefully, again, I will see some of you. I'll share the link one more time for the event on Friday for the search, the agentic search with Tavili. Tavili has a super friendly developer tier that you can sign up for free, and you get something like 1,000 credits or 1,000 searches a month, I think, on there. And they do a really good job of providing context from search results. So if you're trying to add context in through the web, they're one of my favorite tools to just play around with right now, again, on their kind of free developer tier. Also, if you're looking for a completely just free open source, or I think it's open source Python packages, there's a DuckDuckGo Python package you can just pip install. It doesn't give you very good search results, but it is kind of nice if you're just building your agent system and you want to kind of do some test results. You can just use the DuckDuckGo. And so at one point I was doing that when I was rerunning something a whole bunch of times and I don't want to go through all my Tavili credits. And then you could switch to Tavili when you actually want real results. I guess that's the other form of context I didn't mention, like calling other tools, calling databases, whatever you've stored, but also, yeah, search is a big one, right? That's pulling in context from different parts of the web. So let me know what book you want to read next, and then also join the Slack channel and let me know what tool you want to play around with next. So actually, people are talking about like vector databases here. We could do that as one of our next ones if people want. Is that interesting? Just going to pull the Slack link one more time as well. But yeah, are people interested in doing one of the AI build and learns for a RAG system, vector database for context? You could do like Weaviate or Chroma, one of the other ones, or you could pick whatever you want. I've been trying to maybe leave those for a specific tool, but you can go outside of whatever that tool says and try to do that thing with a different tool as well. And this is the link again for the build and learn. We just did this. I need to update it. So we did this one last week. This is the one this Friday. And then next week is reinforcement learning with OpenEnv. And I actually created another one too, but I didn't post it on there yet. Is we're going to cover auto research on the fourth one, which is the 17th. Cool. So people want vector database as the next one. As in by next one, I mean it'll be the week after the auto research one. So then we'll do a vector database one. I might pick one, but again, you could go outside of the one that I picked to build with. And then, yeah, reinforcement learning, OpenEnv. OpenEnv's a cool new environment library from the PyTorch Foundation and Meta. And then auto research, you've probably heard about this maybe. If you've heard about the Claude Code leaks, you're probably in the news where auto research was something Karpathy tweeted about several weeks ago or a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. It's so hard to keep track. Everything moves so fast. This is really cool. So you have it can be a lightweight LM by default. That's what he uses. You can give it a task and then it basically loops over, and they use markdown files for the context within there. So they're not doing a crazy agent system where they really need more than that. But it keeps track of changes that it's been doing, and then it tries to make like a better model. It can actually change the code, change hyperparameters, do a training run, evaluate it, and then change parameters, but also code. So it's kind of the idea of auto research. So we're going to be covering that. Someone said auto research is great. Awesome. Yeah. So if you haven't done it, I haven't actually set up yet. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, make time for it. And then we'll be talking about it on this one's on the 17th. And then the week after that, I'll probably add in a vector database one for people. someone said, David, the first step is admitting that you have an AI problem. I think that's a problem maybe for all of us right now in the industry, right? And it's so hard to keep up. All right, with that, we're at the hour mark. This is really fun. Again, thank you everyone talking in the chat, joining in the discussion today. Hopefully I will talk to some of you all on Friday. And if you are in Seattle, maybe at the Weights and Biases events that we're co-hosting. With that, I'm going to wrap up the stream though. Thank you again, everyone. It was really fun. I'll talk to you all later.